Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Miss Humbert. Welcome to the second part. So we're actually doing this as the second parts of Notes 3, so multiplying radical expressions. The reason why I made the second part of Part 3 is you kind of already did it yesterday when we worked on rationalizing the denominator. So first, let's take a look at what we need to know for multiplying radical expressions. So here's kind of the steps you're going to follow. Basically, if you're inside the radical, you can only be multiplied with things inside the radical. If you're outside the radical, you can only multiply by things outside of the radical. So it's the biggest thing you need to remember. And as always, when you get to the very end, you need to make sure that your answer is fully and completely simplified. So that's what we're going to be working towards today. So take a second and copy it down. And just to remember, if you were to get something left over that had to do with adding or subtracting radicals, that then you go back to the fact that you could only add and subtract them if they have the same radical underneath. Okay? Whereas multiplying, it doesn't matter what we have underneath. We can always multiply. All right, let's take a look at just simplifying some basic expressions. So here, this one is pretty straightforward. We can only multiply things underneath the radical. So we're going to multiply the 2 times the 5. So 2 times 5 gives us the square root of 10. Take a look at number 2. You can only multiply the outside. So 4 times 6 is 24. And then multiplying underneath the radical, 3 times 2 is 6. So the last thing you would need to check on this one is to make sure that 6 has no pairs, which we pretty logically can see that it doesn't. Okay, as far as 24 is concerned, we don't have to worry about breaking 24 down into pairs because for 24, it's not underneath the radical, so that doesn't matter. So this right here would be your final answer. All right, let's take a look at number 3. So again, we're multiplying outside of the radical and then inside the radical. So to start off with, I'm going to multiply 2 times 4 because both of those are outside of the radical. 2 times 4 is 8. And then I'm going to multiply underneath the radical, which is 3 times 2 times 3, and that's going to give me 18. Now, don't tell me this is your answer because it's not. We have to go through and we have to break down 18 and see what pairs we can find. Do this as 9 and 2 and 3 and 3. So we have a pair of 3's. So on the outside of the radical, we have 8 times 3, and left underneath the radical is just 2. Remember that you need to multiply these on the outside of the radical. 8 times 3 is 24, square root of 2. So that right there is your final answer. I'm going to go ahead and I want you guys to try number 4 on your own. So see if you can multiply those. So only multiply the outsides together and then the insides together. Let's take a look at number 5. So for number 5, we want to multiply the outsides together and then the insides together. So first I'm going to take 3 times 2, and that's going to give me 6. And then I'm going to multiply inside of the radical. So I'm going to take 12 times 6 times 3, and that gives me 216. So now I want to see how I can break down 216. So when we're trying to break that down, we want to look for pairs. Okay, so I tried a bunch of perfect squares to see what would fit into this, and I actually found that 36 did. So I found that this is the same as 36 and 6. Well, 36 I can break down to 6 and 6, and I could continue to break this down to 3 and 2 and 3 and 2, but I see that I have a pair of 6's out there. So I'm going to take that and multiply it outside the front. So I have 6 times 6, and left underneath the radical is 6. So 6 times 6 is 36, and then left underneath the radical is 6. So this right here is my final answer. I want you to go ahead and try number 6 on your own. So here's a couple of things you want to remember. Negative 3 is going to be multiplied by, what is this coefficient? 1 right there. So only multiply the outside of the radicals together and then the inside of the radicals together. Okay? Next, let's take a look at number 7. So now we're adding some variables, but it doesn't change what we're doing. So the first thing we're going to do is multiply 20 and 6 together. And when you do that, you get 120. 120, there we go. And then you're going to multiply x squared times x to the first. Now remember, when you multiply x squared times x to the first, you're going to add those exponents, and that gives you x cubed. So we have 120 x cubed. So now we're going to go ahead and break down 120. Well, I look at that as 12 and 10. 12 I can break down to 4 and 3. 10 I can break down to 5 and 2. 4 breaks down to 2 and 2. So here I have a pair of 2's, and that's all I'm going to be able to pull out. But don't forget about those x's over here. We have 3 x's, which means I can take out a pair of 1 x's. So on the outside of that radical, I'm going to have 2 and then x. And then left underneath the radical is 3 times 5 times 2, which is going to give me 30. And believe it or not, the square root of 30 is fully simplified. I'm going to go ahead and have you guys try number 8 on your own. Next, let's take a look at number 9. So for number 9, you're going to start by multiplying the outside. So we have negative 3 times 6. That's going to give us negative 18. Then we're going to multiply underneath the radical. So I'm going to do 7 times 21, and that gives us 147. And then m cubed r squared. Okay, so let's go ahead and split this up if we can. So 147, I'm going to break down into 3 and 49. Again, I'm always trying to look for those perfect squares. 49 I can break down to 7 and 7. So then I have a pair of 7s. I have 3 m's and 2 r's, so I have a pair of r's and a pair of m's. So on the outside of my radical now, I'm going to have negative 18 times that pair of 7s times the m and times the r. Left underneath the radical, I have an m and a 3, so I have 3m. Multiplying these two together, I get negative 126, and then m, r, and then the square root of 3m. All right, so let's take a look at number 10. Now, number 10 I think looks a little more complicated than it actually is. So what we're doing is we're going to use that distributive property. So I'm going to multiply things in. So really what I'm doing, just to break it down here more for a sec, is I'm taking the square root of 3 times the square root of 5 minus 4 times the square root of 3. And just like we've been doing, we're only going to multiply things underneath the radical with other things underneath the radical, and things outside the radical only with things outside the radical. So I can take this 3 and this 5 and multiply it and get the square root of 15. Then I'm going to subtract the square root minus 4 times the square root of 3. So all I did was take this 4 and make it a coefficient for the square root of 3. So this right here is your final answer. Next, let's take a look at number 11. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to distribute this in. So I'm going to take each of these and multiply them. So I'm going to multiply by the coefficients on the outside. So I have a negative 3. And then that's at negative 3 is actually going to be multiplied by that 2 because both the negative 3 and the 2 are on the outside of the radical. So left underneath the radical is 3. Next, I'm going to take the negative 3, and then I have square root of 3, and I'm going to multiply that times the square root of 6. Both of these are then underneath the radical. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So negative 3 times 2 is negative 6 square root of 3 plus a negative 3 square root of 18. So the last thing I need to do here is split this up into pairs. So this is the same as 9 and 2 and 3 and 3. So I can pull a pair out of 3's. Don't forget to multiply it by that original 3. So I get negative 6 square root of 3 plus a negative 9 square root of 2. And I got the 9 by multiplying the negative 3 times the pair of 3's. So this right there is your final answer. Let's take a look at number 12. So number 12, we're going to distribute in that radical again. So that 3 initially is going to come out on the outside because it's the outside of the radical. And then I'm going to keep the square root of 14x underneath the radical. Now I have the square root of 2x, and I'm going to multiply that by the square root of 14x. Okay, so then here we have 3 square root of 14x. And now for this one, I'm going to multiply underneath the radical. So 2 times 14 gives me 28. X times x is x squared. All right, so let's go ahead and break down 28. We can break that down into 4 and 7. 4 breaks down to 2 and 2. And then notice we have 2 x's, which are also going to be a pair. So here we're going to get 3 square root of 14x minus 2x, that's going to come on the outside of the radical, and underneath would be the square root of 7. So this right here is your final answer. Okay, I'm going to do one more for you. Eventually, I'm going to have you try number 14 on your own. Let's take a look at number 13. So we have the square root of 5, and we're going to keep, first of all, we're going to distribute that in. We're going to keep this 5 on the outside, and then we're multiplying square root of 5 times square root of 2. We're going to keep this 4 on the outside, then we're multiplying square root of 5 times square root of 8. So then we have 5 underneath the radical, square root of 10. Then we have 4. And underneath the radical, 5 times 4 is 40. Okay, so square root of 10 is only going to break down to 5 and 2, so we don't have any pairs there. 40, however, I could break down to 4 and 10. 10 breaks down to 5 and 2, and 4 breaks down to 2 and 2. So I have a pair of 2's that I can take out and multiply by that 4. So then I have 5 square root of 10 minus 4 times 2, which is 8 square root of 10. If you notice, I have 2 square roots of 10, so I can actually add them together to get negative 3 square root of 10. So this right here is my final answer. Last but not least, I want you to go ahead and try number 14 on your own. This concludes the video for today. We're going to do 15 through 18 in class tomorrow, so you don't have to worry about those. Please remember to take the Schoology quiz once you're done.